Good morning and good afternoon. This is Monica Paolini with Sensafili, and this is a conversation today that is part of a report on densification by Sensafili and published in collaboration with RCR Wireless News. Today, with me, I have the pleasure to talk to Ken Sanfeld, the president of Solid Americas. Ken, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Monica. I appreciate it very much.
Okay, let's start by talking about what is Solid doing in the area of densification and what is it you're personally involved with?
Thanks, Monica. Yeah, we're very focused on in-building wireless coverage. Right now, for many years, our focus has been indoor DAS solutions, and so that continues to go on. We're focused on bringing new technologies to the in-building, to the enterprise, middle price segment of the business to be able to broaden that market space. So we're very focused on the middle price densification right now. The other area that we spend a lot of time in is new solutions and technologies for outdoor environments, and particularly the dense urban environments, where we believe we can make some solutions that will solve for the dense urban environments differently than some of the solutions that are currently available. So we're very focused on those two specific areas.
So, well, that's interesting because you're looking at the both parts of the densification, both crucial dimensions, the outdoor and indoors. How is the balance between the two changing or evolving as we move forward?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt we're more focused on in-building than we are outdoor, mostly because we see, there's a huge demand coming from the in-building space. We all know that, right? It's pretty common knowledge. In terms of the time spent, that's also the reason being that that's where the more of the problems are. That's where the ability to make a solution that will solve for those problems is very striking. From an outdoor perspective, most of what's going on out in the outdoor space right now is small cells, right? Deploying more and different types of small cells and solving for that environment. And so meanwhile, we're working on what would be essentially outdoor DAS solutions to compete with small cells or augment and work with small cells. And really what we're focused on there is ODAS solutions potentially are more future-proof on the pole than a small cell. They can be smaller, they can have more capabilities, deliver more service and more spectrum than a small cell solution can. They just haven't evolved to that point yet, but we think they really can be. And so we'll have to see how that goes.
How about the cost?
The cost is actually lower because you're actually putting less electronics on the pole, and the majority of the electronics are kept back at the C-RAN location. And from a future-proof perspective, you're not actually pushing protocol-dependent electronics out to the pole, which is what has always made DAS so attractive from an outdoor perspective. And that doesn't mean that you're giving up a lot of functionality. You're still going to have all the controls at the C-RAN to be able to do SON and all the interference management. You'll just be doing that at a different location, so it changes where the sensing is located.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now let's start moving indoors, but keeping an eye on the outdoors, because the two are not completely separate. So if you have indoor infrastructure, you are more shielded in terms of interference, but there is still something you have to keep in mind. And so you either deploy on a different channel or you have to deal with interference. How do you see that playing out?
So I think for a while, until we have all those additional bands to play with, which would be really nice to have different frequencies, and also the use of unlicensed like LTU and things like that. In the meantime, the systems are getting smarter, the software is getting smarter. However, I do see a period of time where the in-building handoff to the outdoor and vice versa will not happen. I do believe that there's going to be, in order to hit the targets in terms of covering these in-building systems, I think what we're going to have is a period of time where there's going to be a gap in the data as you go from inside to outside, and maybe only a second long, but there's going to be some issues that are going to occur, and over time I think that will get better. When it will get better is when you have stronger virtualization of the software-defined networks, and you'll essentially have APIs that will allow an ecosystem of people to all play on the same playing field when it comes to SON and being able to optimize third-party solutions. And once that happens and that's more standardized, then we'll see a lot more cohesiveness in those handoffs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to get to virtualization, cloud-run architectures in a while, but before we get there, let's sort of step back a little bit and look at what's happening. And we had this great promise of having massive densification on day one, small cells everywhere, but it's actually taking longer. Why do you think it is so?
Well, from an in-building perspective, the challenge with the solutions that are currently on the market, you either have a solution that has more active electronics where you're putting radios on the ceiling, or you have essentially a more traditional approach where you're putting a small cell on the front end of a DAS, or you're actually just deploying a small cell in a closet and then just radiating from the closet. I think the problem really is there hasn't been any type of a hybrid solution that brings it all together. So you have the smaller buildings where you can put, 2, 3, or 4 eFemtos, small cells, and you just put them in the building and you cover that smaller building. When you get to the little bit larger spaces, you have a choice. You either distribute RF or you can distribute radios around, right? So there's some solutions where they do both. The problem with distributing radios is how do you scale with multiple operators, more bands? How do you deal with the additional cabling, the costs associated with adding more to it, so your TCO goes up, or you can distribute, RF, right? So those are some of the different ways, the different challenges you incur when you go into those different options for deploying in building. Go ahead.
Yeah, so there are different solutions out there. So technology doesn't seem to be the limiting factor, but the cost and how you put all these solutions together seems to be more of an issue in terms of speeding up the deployments.
Yeah, so there's there's 2 parts to that. So there's the actual infrastructure of distributing or radiating the RF, delivering the RF to the user, and I think those solutions, if you say it quickly, really need to be Wi-Fi like. Or essentially CAT cables and low cost devices that can do multiple operators, and ideally they're solutions that can scale to multiple protocols and multiple bands without having to add more electronics on the ceiling. And then you have the connection to the core, which is probably the bigger cost driver, because that gets into our next topic, is probably business models. If the enterprise can't make the whole one simple solution work, including the operator connection portion, then it doesn't matter how good the RF solution is, it's useless, right? So you ultimately need one simplified solution that will bring those 2 things together. And frankly, it's what the network operators require as well. They can no longer be in an environment where they have to roll expensive trucks and engineers to a small project just to turn it on. It needs to be basically a self install, and potentially maybe not a self optimization or commissioning, because in that respect we would utilize the system integrators that are experienced in the field of doing that. So, but it could be potentially a lot of self installation going on because it is a CAT-based solution. Yeah.
Yeah, so how do you see that work in practice? Because there has been a lot of thinking about it, but it doesn't seem like we really got a model. And in fact, probably the closest model that I can think of in terms of this new indoor deployments is the DAS neutral host model, which has been working reasonably well for DAS. Is that something that we can use for small cells as well? Or that you could continue to be useful for DAS as well, for that matter.
Well, so at Solid, what we believe is that the DAS essentially and the small cells will become one hybrid, simplified solution. So I'm not sure what the new term is going to be, Monica. We might call it a hybrid DAS solution, I'm not sure what the term's going to be. However, there is going to be a new term and a new solution, combined solution. And these solutions will be deployed by third-party owner NutraHost as well, as they work with people who own buildings that don't want to own or manage or deal with these systems. It does start changing the business model, which I know we're going to get into in a second, but and it changes for the operators, because the operators don't want to devote a lot of resources. They just want to manage their service. They want to manage their KPIs and guarantee that their licensed signal is not either being interfered with, and that they can manage their customers. And as long as those things are happening, they're motivated to do whatever it needs to be, that the enterprise can deploy these systems. And so ultimately, all the parties need to have a win-win solution. And in order to do that, you really need to bring the whole thing together in one simplified architecture. The days of having multiple non-cohesive systems, it's just not affordable. It's just not attractive for anyone to deploy that.
Yeah, and I guess it's not attractive for anybody involved because it requires more cost and more work. But from an operator, let's start from the operator's viewpoint. When they do share infrastructure, because in this case they would be sharing infrastructure, we have somebody else installing network that uses their spectrum, they stand to lose some control and exclusivity. How do you think you're dealing with it?
Actually, I don't think they're actually losing control. Oops. Oh, sorry, something happened there. I don't think they're losing control. They don't need to lose control or exclusivity at all. And the model that we see coming, the technology is ready for it. I see that every operator will have their bands and their radio resources. And they basically need, and then they'll have their management capability. Everything will be completely separate. There'll be some convergence, maybe at the antenna, maybe at the amplifier. And of course, they'll also need to, they'll want to know that they're getting good KPIs, right, from the system. So they'll have access to the management layer, and they'll be able to control the system. But the goal is that they shouldn't have to do anything except if the red light goes on that says the KPIs are bad, so that someone fixes it, right?
Right.
But right now, think about this. Right now, they don't have any system in these thousands and thousands of buildings, and so there is no KPIs because there's no performance. So the goal is to be able to deploy tens of thousands of projects without the network operator having to service and maintain all these systems. In order to do that, we need each person in the ecosystem to be able to take their responsibility, pay their costs, and manage what's appropriate. And that's going to be done through a centralized cloud capability and lots of virtualization. The systems will no longer be, oh, you need to buy a separate box and another box for another technology and for another system. It's one box, one system, software defined. There's no need for, as you scale, to rip and replace entire systems. And that is a huge thing for the enterprise, right? Anything that's obtrusive and requires rip and replace extensively over time is really frowned upon. It doesn't mean they know it has to happen as technology evolves, but which is why DAS has always been really attractive, because DAS is essentially a dumb pipe, right? So that's why there's a part of DAS that's really attractive to an enterprise, and then there's a part of DAS that's very unattractive, and that's the cost of the cabling, and then there's no connection to the carrier core, right? So those have been the unattractive parts.
Right. But otherwise, as I said, there is good and bad, and there is a sense of that we need to kind of realign the interest there. And so one issue that comes up all the time, and who's going to pay for this infrastructure, and who's going to pay for the equipment and installation? Yeah. Who do you think is going to step up?
I think you're going to see all models continue. I think the one model that you're going to see become more prevalent is the enterprise spend. The only reason the enterprises don't spend, the middle price doesn't spend on these solutions now, is there's no guarantee or there's no path towards easy connection to the carriers. that is precisely the only reason why they don't want to spend any money. I don't believe that the other models, I believe there'll be some projects where the carrier will decide that they want to put capital in, or they want to supply backhaul because they have an interest in that project, right? I believe third-party owners will continue to grow in the space. Their ROIs will change and where they get the revenue and how they do things. But these systems, getting the carriers on these systems, who pays for all of it? And some of the 3PO systems, maybe it's not all the 3PO are the carriers. Maybe it's an advertising model, or it's the building owners participating, and they're managing the system. So it's going to be a little bit different models than the typical third-party projects. But all those models will exist, and the technology will just allow them to bring the cost down, and they'll be able to tackle smaller projects than more than just a typical large venue.
And I guess in this context, the enterprise, if the enterprise pays for the installation and the equipment, they might have a larger role as they negotiate with operators. So the relationship between the enterprise and the operators is bound to change as well.
Yes. So some enterprise customers are going to be large enough where they'll actually have someone on staff that will potentially manage some of that. And then there'll be a very large portion of the middle price enterprise customers, which will either ask someone else to do it, or they'll ask, a third-party owner, or maybe just a third-party system integrator that performs the function of installing, working with an operator to at least get approval to turn on their signal. And they'll handle those things for the customer. So it'll be a mix between, large enterprise being able to do their own thing, and then third-party owner provided performance, the system, as well as system integrators. And I think the ecosystem actually stays very similar. It's just that we're going to be able to touch projects that we normally just weren't feasible. Mm-hmm. And that's really the goal, right? And I think what will happen is the ecosystem will mature, right? The operators will be able to mature because they're looking to grow their services and revenue base from the users. The system integrators will expand and grow in their capabilities to the enterprise, and the enterprise will get much smarter about how they deploy these systems as soon as they're more capable and the business models are ready.
Yeah, and also this sort of reflects the increasing needs of the enterprise. So the enterprise is willing to pay because they have bigger needs. Can you comment on what is it you're seeing in terms of the changing needs of the enterprise?
Well, the enterprise is, it used to be, from a voice perspective, the voice days, it was an issue where, not having voice coverage was just a real big problem, right? And today it is still an issue in a lot of enterprise. However, a lot of things are migrating towards data-based architectures, and so now it's really more of a mobility play, and a play for, as PBXs start to go away. Enterprises see the need to be able to enable everyone's technology and everyone's service provider. One of the number one things we hear from all of the middle price type customers is that they'd like all operators to be able to be serviced. If they had to pick a couple, they'll pick some of the bigger ones, but ultimately they don't want to leave out anyone. Why would they want to leave out someone? And they ask the question, why do I have to leave out a smaller operator? Why can't I turn them on? And so today, the answer is, well, not, depending on the project, not everyone wants to play and all this kind of things. That will be a thing of the past. That has to go away. The system not only needs to be out of the box ready to have all operators connect, but all the operators need to understand that they need to be willing to communicate and work with those smaller projects. I'll say projects because I'm not sure who's going to contact them. It could be a system integrator, a third-party owner. It could be the enterprise themselves contacting the operator. But there needs to be a plan and a way to handle those type of things.
And do you think that mobile operators are getting sort of better in a sense that they're more sensitive and more open to the needs of the enterprise? What is it you're hearing from them?
Absolutely. The network operators, they recognize that they need solutions. They need technology. They recognize they need business plans to be able to better provide service to the enterprise. The days of deploying a single operator system and walking away, it's not as easy anymore. The customers want to know that there's a solution that their building will have that allows multiple types of services to be operated. They want to be more future-proof, if you will, and they're willing to invest in it too. They're whether they're leasing the building or whether it's a building owner, they're willing to invest in their infrastructure, and that's why they're starting to get more picky about what's going in their building. And now more than ever, it's been a very strong movement for the last 10 years. They're getting much more savvy, to the needs. So the network operators are absolutely clamoring for better solutions to allow them to keep their business customers happy. And if that means that they have to supply a system where the other operators potentially can connect, that's fine. It's going to be a kind of a quest of who's first, and maybe in that respect, maybe in that situation, maybe they provide more. They provide backhaul, or maybe not capital, but they might provide backhaul or better customer service in that particular project, right? So they're going to be fighting for their piece of that enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's interesting. Now. As I promised, we need to talk about the cloud and the virtualization efforts, because those are going to be important in actually enabling some of the densification efforts. How do you see how important it is? What are we going to be when it gets to the access network? What is that we're going to put in the cloud and whatnot, and how is that going to happen?
Well, it's all, we believe the more we can put in the cloud, the better, right? Mm-hmm. The more that we can provide to the network operator from our cloud at a neutral location, the better. The less that a network operator has to roll a truck to a customer's site and go in their building and work in things in their building, they should never have to go to the customer site, would be the ultimate goal. Network virtualization and SDN is absolutely critical for this. Essentially you have a middleman that is essentially aggregating and providing that service to the network operator, so that you can aggregate tens of thousands of projects all over the US without having to be able to manage every one of those properties. It becomes a much more manageable proposition to the network operator and becomes very valuable. But they haven't been able to do that up until now, right? It's only in the last few years here that we're actually getting to the point where the network operator is able to work with a multitude of software vendors for the virtualization of their network, and being able to add capabilities and open up their core to new models and new ways of doing business. And that is the enabler. That is the enabler for all these things.
Right. Now, in closing, let's talk a little bit about the future and the future 5G, IoT. How is that going to change the way we densify networks?
Yeah, it's going to be very important. These high frequency bands are going to become critical. I think you're going to have a mix, and this is really important from an in-building infrastructure, which means the enterprise gets even more important because there's more infrastructure that may need to go in a building. You might have a time where you have you do an in-building solution for densification, and you might have an antenna on a table that services just a conference table, but it provides multi-gigabit speeds at that little spot. But it all connects back to the same gateway core, right? So it's absolutely going to be critical that the solution can scale to do all these things. And that's why more of a software-defined architecture is critical. Just because most of those are frequency bands, but we don't know exactly how the protocol is going to work and how that's going to function. But it's going to be very micro hotspot focused when you're talking about those millimeter wave technologies, right? Ideally, we'd like to work in lower frequency bands so we can deal with propagation improvements, a better propagation. But I believe those frequency bands for those 5G bands are going to be absolutely critical. I think, for example, in places like hospitals, where you have environments where you have extreme data requirements, you're going to see micro hotspots where you're going to utilize those frequencies on a very localized basis to solve high capacity data needs. and you're not going to try to propagate that through 300 foot of walls. You're going to have to be very localized that way, which comes back to enterprise infrastructure. Both the fiber and the cat cables, the infrastructure has to be something that you can constantly add to, just like Wi-Fi.
Right.
A LAN and a Wi-Fi network today are consistently being optimized. They're being added to, they're adding more location, more access points, and it's no different for licensed bands either. And so there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to continue on the same theme of being able to additionally add services as we go, which means that the service provider, the network operator is going to be looking for ways to enable that. Ideally, I think the network operators are going to get more involved with supplying pipes to the building. And dare I say, there's going to become a point in time where potentially an enterprise deploys a large system, and essentially you might get a quasi, kind of a roaming situation where if the building owner is paying for the pipe and a device comes in the building and it uses a lot of high-speed data and those micro hotspots, maybe there's an agreement in place, and it becomes more second nature for the network operator to have these little micro agreements for each enterprise, where they can handle those users that go on the system without having to fund the whole building and manage the whole system, right? And that ecosystem ideally would allow them to make incremental revenue that they wouldn't be able to get if they didn't invest in the whole system.
Yeah, so I guess it would be a network where you have a non-homogeneous type of density of demand, and where you have a lot of density, you use different bands, and then the enterprise knows where that is much better than the operator, so they obviously have an advantage, but then the operator can manage the traffic more efficiently because they're not the subscribers.
That's correct.
And another thing that I meant to ask you is public safety. That's a whole new issue for indoor coverage, because with macro we sort of sorted the problem out in an easier way.
Right. Correct. Yeah, it is absolutely. It is something that gets forgotten. You have kind of two schools of thought out there. You have guys that are focused on the commercial side, and there's very lucrative potential future business, right, to grow that. And then you have a group of people that focus on public safety because it's a specific problem. I believe the in-building systems and the systems that Solid produces will ultimately be able to solve for both of those needs. They may be two separate systems. They may use separate cables. They may be managed by one cloud. Regardless of how they go together, the enterprise is going to require that the provider of the solution be able to put it all together as one system. Regardless of what the code requires for the certain cables and certain systems, there's no doubt there's special requirements for first responder systems, and they have to be met, and they have to be, but we also haven't had, we've been lacking the discipline of having a national, defined national code that gets implemented everywhere. Well, the more that happens, we'll start seeing the systems be able to do more. But for absolutely, the system in the building needs to be able to support those public safety bands in the future. It can't continue to be two separate, well, it can be two separate systems, but it can't be two separate systems from a management and a overall maintenance perspective. The customers are requiring that they be able to work with one partner to be able to put it all together.
Yeah. And I guess the more we depend on wireless connectivity for access, the more you need this kind of, you have to think of public safety and everything else, because everything is wireless. So every communication has that aspect.
Well, when you think about it, wireless communication is safety, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, a 911 call is a voice call. But there's also data associated with it. There's location technology, and by the way, one of the things that the enterprise requires nowadays is they do require that the 911 system, work to code and is compliant. But they also are looking for location, right? They want to be able to know where the people are in the building from a safety perspective. Mm-hmm. Depending on where they are, location is a huge safety thing, as well as a potential revenue producer of knowing where your customers are in a building. So there's a lot of opportunity for location. There's also a lot of undiscussed privacy issues that have to be resolved from a location perspective too.
Yeah.
But from a public safety perspective of knowing where the device is from a safety perspective, that's a no-brainer. If there's a device in the building, it may not have a person with it, but we need to know where they all are.
Mm.
The funny thing about cell phones are people, you rarely let them go. Smartphones, I should say.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I guess, as you say, it's true for both people and devices that are not attached to humans, because actually that you want to make sure if they get displaced, moved, or, tempered.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay, well, thanks so much for your time and for sharing your views with us today.
I appreciate it, Monica. Thank you very much today. Appreciate it.
So, and thank you all for watching this conversation with Ken Stanfield at Solid. And this was part of the report on densification and the evolution of the RAN by Sense of Feeling collaboration with RCR Wireless News. Thank you all for listening in.